you're looking at some really expensive books, really, really expensive books there. I won't even bother to tell you what they cost, but they're very expensive. Why in the world would I have really super expensive books that have basically no English in them whatsoever? All you've got in here is chart, page after page of nothing but charts. Oh, wow, fancy schmancy with the little zoom thing there. And then here's Resultate der Collation, result of the collation. This is called Text und Textwert. This set is sort of the pre-computer work of the Institute in Munster, where they are collating a certain number of manuscripts at particular points of textual variation. It's the printed precursor to what is now the online databases and tools that Munster is making available to New Testament scholars to do New Testament textual study in what's called the Coherence Based Genealogical Method. Obviously, computers are much faster than we are, and the database is much larger now than what you have here. The problem is that so far we only have access to the databases and tools for the general epistles and for Acts. And I can't be in this program forever, so I'm in looking at P45, it's great to have Acts now. And it's great to have the online tools for Acts because a major portion of P45 is Acts. But the most important portion of P45 that I need to look at is Mark. And John is important as well. Matthew and Luke are super fragmentary in P45. So what I have here are the text and Textwert volumes for John and Mark. And what that will allow me to do very slowly is to do manual CBGM type studies of key textual variants in P45 to utilize this very new technology to shed some light on the textual background of P45, which is my subject to begin with. And so those just came today. For the vast majority of the human population, they would have no meaning whatsoever. I understand that. And I'm going to have to be really utilizing my best reading glasses because that font is really small. And it's just page after page after page of tables and collation of manuscripts at particular points. But it's it's extremely useful, extremely helpful along those lines. And who knows what it will help us to dig up. But it's a whole new field. It's a whole new area. And so that's just, I realize for most people that's like really boring. But in light of what we're about to look at, it's very, very relevant. And that is, y'all can stop with the computer stuff. I don't care. If you want to get muted or something on Twitter, I don't care. Just, yeah, I know you're geeks and you just got to do your geek thing, but just try to control yourself on the geek thing. Uh-huh. Well, you see, I'm not even ready to go there. CBGM, Coherence Based Genealogical Method. Maybe in a year, I might be able to put together the type of slides and graphics to try to bring a general audience along in understanding such terms as pre-genealogical coherence, coherence, local stemmata, global stemmata, principles of parsimony, and everything else goes along with it. A book was published just about 3 weeks ago. It came out. I think it was Dr. Wasserman and Dr. Gurry. I know it was Dr. Gurry, but I think it was Tommy Wasserman was the co-author, which is meant to be a introduction to the whole concept of CBGM, and it is just simply extremely difficult even to follow what is meant to be the most simplified possible presentation of CBGM. In fact, the primary reason that CBGM is struggling for acceptance amongst many New Testament scholars and textual critics is most people just don't understand it. It is not what I was taught in the 1980s. It does require a fair amount of mathematical analysis. The computer does a lot of it, but you still need to understand what in the world the computer is doing. And it goes against the grain of where most of us are. For example, CBGM has, for those who are using it, only established the existence of one textual group, the Byzantine. It basically says there is no such thing as Alexandrian, Western, Caesarean. Doesn't exist. It basically undercuts. And I'm pretty certain now, by the way, that my initial thinking on the Tyndale House Greek New Testament was correct. Yeah. The primary editor, the man who did almost all this work, is Dirk Junkind. And one of the strongest published criticisms of CBGM is from Dr. Junkind. So I'm pretty confident that the Tyndale House Greek New Testament sort of represents a pushback against CBGM. But if I don't have it in here, but if the Editio Critica Major, the ECM2 specifically, but the currently being published major edition of the Greek New Testament with massive amounts of collation, which is using CBGM, which when it's finished will probably be that big easily, size-wise. Since it's using CBGM and it looks like all the English Bible translations, are utilizing ECM, and it's going to determine what's in the NA 28, 29. Well, NA 28 is already out. So NA 29, NA 30 is all going to reflect what's coming out in ECM. I don't know how you can do serious textual critical scholarship in the New Testament and not at least minimally interact with CBGM, and if you don't accept its principles or its application, say why. So that's why I'm having to do what I'm doing with the study that I'm doing. What CBGM seems to be able to help us to do is to identify the purest streams of transmission of a text. The question is, how far back does that go? And those are there's still a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions. Dr. Mink in Munster is the primary individual who's developed this. And I'll just explain this one thing. And I'm sorry, most folks have probably fallen asleep already, but let me just explain this one thing. One of the elements of CBGM is you look. If you have a simple variant where you have two possibilities, and you ask the computer to look through the witnesses that you have available for that reading, and when you look at the manuscripts that have reading A, and then you look at the manuscripts that have reading B, and you ask yourself the question, the manuscripts that have reading A, how coherent are they in having the similar readings elsewhere? In other words, you're looking, and by the way, part of CBGM is you have to stop thinking of manuscripts, and I was even using the wrong terminology. You don't think of manuscripts, you think of witnesses. And you go, what's the difference? How do I explain this? We've known for a long time, and when I've done my presentation on New Testament text reliability, I've pointed to two minuscule manuscripts, 1739 and 1881, that we know are from the 9th, 10th centuries, and yet we know they're copying 2nd or 3rd century documents. So that somebody hundreds and hundreds of years later is copying their exemplar is very, very old. So there's not a bunch of generations in between. And so the witness of the text in 1739 can be much older than the manuscript itself is. And you might have manuscripts that are 500 years younger. So in other words, 500 years closer to the original than 1739, and yet their witness, the text they witness, is actually much farther down the road from the originals. And so one of the things you've got to try to do is stop thinking manuscript and start thinking witness. What is the text that it gives us, and how far back does that go? So the point is, when you look at the manuscripts that have reading A in them and reading B, if the largest portion of manuscripts that have reading A, if their closest possible parent text, not manuscript, but parent text, that they could be related to, likewise has A, looks like the copyists were being very faithful. And when you compare them at other places, these manuscripts have what's called high coherence, say 95, 97%. But then you look over at B, and you have to start searching up the line to the 4th, 5th, 6th possible progenitor before you find somebody else that has the same reading. That the majority of the ones that these manuscripts are related to have reading A rather than reading B. What that tells you is, in all likelihood, the scribe made a mistake here or had an edit here, but if there's lower coherence here and higher coherence here, then that's part of the information that you want to take into making your textual critical decision. It's information we've never had before. When looking, if you've been sitting there with your Nessie-Allen text, and you're looking at a particular variant, and you're looking at just a couple lines of information, you're basically just going, well, okay, looks like Vaticanus and a few minuscules here have this, and then it's just the Byzantines, and you got D out there doing its thing, and so we go with Vaticanus. That's, hopefully you've translated it, and you might go, oh, it looks, maybe there's some homoioteliton going on there, similar endings. There's some things you can look at, but we've never had this type of information before. And in the general epistles and in Acts, there's been about, significantly, maybe 70 places. I'd have to look up the numbers. I've got them around someplace, where you've had a fairly significant change. What's interesting is even the application of CBGM, it's all the same text. And I can assure you, once again, once ECM is done, the big thing like that you can't really carry around. Though, obviously, it'll be digitized eventually, and we'll all carry it around our iPhones. Though I imagine it'll be pretty expensive for a while. If you exegete that the same way you exegete the Tyndale House. Same teaching. And in fact, you get down to, I think it's 85 or 87% is the number that CBGM says it's statistically irrelevant now, because all manuscripts are going to agree that much. That's just the base number. And so the idea that, the New Testament once used to teach something different, all the rest of that stuff, CBGM really does, from an apologetic perspective, it really does have some interesting application. It ain't ready for prime time yet, just like that alleged first century thing of Mark wasn't ready for prime time a few years ago. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And one of the big questions that I'm working on is, how does this relate to the earliest manuscripts? Because it doesn't really care too much about how old your manuscript is. It cares about how consistent your text is in being consistent with what you think the Ausgangstext, the original text is. And what has happened, it's interesting, the Byzantine text guys aren't really sure what to do with this. Because on the one hand, it's really positive to them, because there are a number of readings that CBGM says, hey, guess what? Byzantine text has it here over against all the earliest manuscripts. There's a couple places. I wasn't prepared to do this, but since someone asked, I could give you one particular example in the general epistles where, up until this point, I haven't looked, but I would imagine the UBS text probably gave this an A or B rating. And CBGM comes along and says, nope. The coherence is found in the Byzantine reading, and it's not found in the earliest manuscripts. So there's a number of let's see here. There's a number of particularly later Byzantine readings. The CBGM says that's got the best chance of being the original. And so a lot of the changes have come up along those lines. And so you'd think the Byzantine guys are like, woohoo, yeah, we're getting vindicated. Probably not. Because obviously there's a lot of other places where it goes, no, that's a secondary reading. And here's the reason why. It doesn't go back far enough. And the grounds that it gives are not the same grounds that the Byzantine text priority guys have been arguing for a very, very long time. So, it gives and it takes. And so I'm not sure exactly what the final result's going to be. Acts was interesting, but Acts has its own history. Now they're getting into the Gospels. And so I think Mark is next. Once Mark comes out, now we're going to really start seeing what kind of impact CBGM is going to have. And it'll get a lot more interesting at that point. Was there a...
I was just going to remark that I'm sitting here following the YouTube chat, and it is interesting to me that as you're going through this, how many people are commenting on suddenly it's all clicking in their heads. It's coming together. We got one guy who's talking about he's in the middle of studying for a nursing degree in the finals, and his inclination is to drop what he's doing and look at P45.
You need to do well on your finals there, bro.
But the point of all of it is that for all of these people, they're remarking about how it's suddenly clicking into place as to why these acronyms, why these terms, why these studies become so important.
And I haven't even started. Let me tell you something. See, I didn't want to do this. I'm not doing this. Please, no one say, "Oh, James White was explaining CBGM." No, I'm just. You have to have real clarity in your own thinking to be able to explain something to other people. And there are only a few people that have real clarity in their own thinking on this subject in the world right now, to be honest with you. And I'm not there yet. It's extremely complicated. That's what's turning a lot of people off to it. But we've been saying for a long time, it could be neat when we can get computers involved in helping us analyze the manuscripts. Well, did you really expect that it was just simply going to do the same thing we've been doing all along? What we can't see is the interrelationship between manuscripts that a computer can see. Because, when we were trying to identify text types, that was basically that the general rule was a 70% agreement in particular variants. Well, now the computer can start saying, this manuscript agrees with this manuscript 97.5% of the time. And with this manuscript, 95%, but this one only 82% of the time. And then it can track that through all the various variants where those manuscripts happen to contain the same material, and can start popping this stuff out for you in tables. So you can actually go online, you can go to Munster, and you can start using these online sources, and you can go to a particular variant, and there's now a specific nomenclature by which you identify variants now. You can't just simply say, well, you see there in Nessie-Allen where you've got the little circle? That doesn't work anymore. Computers don't like that. They want to be a whole lot more specific than that. And so now what you've got to do is you've got to, each word is assigned a even number, and the space between it is an odd number. And so you have to identify the variant based on giving the computer the proper information. And then what you can do, and you see, CBGM still requires editors to input based on textual critical principles. That's why some of the Byzantine guys will still say, but you can put in, I think the original was this. Let's see what that does to the coherence of the witnesses. And then you can flip it and go, okay, let's see what happens when we put this as the original. And then you see what happens with the witnesses. And the computer spits all this stuff out. We couldn't do that before. And that's a good thing. It's a positive thing. I mean, CBGM is basically telling us, here's the sort of the baseline agreement of all these manuscripts. And at least on that level, from an apologetic perspective, it's like, all those people who think these manuscripts are just all over the planet, sorry, the computers even tell us you're wrong about that. But beyond that, how much part of the argumentation is how much light can be shed upon the history of the text by CBGM. And right now, we don't know. That's something I want to work on. That's what I have to work on. Because, see, my initial goal was to ask the question, why is the text of Mark in P45, why does it show a different textual orientation than you have in the rest of this manuscript? And can this cast a light upon the period of time immediately before P45, hence going into the 2nd century? Once I had to address that question, now all of a sudden I've got to deal with CBGM because, well, you can't avoid it now. It is part and parcel of the New Testament textual critical area. And at first I'm like, and see, I even had the book in here last time. I was going to read you these. And I'm going to resist the temptation. I'm going to resist temptation because I'm just not ready. But, one of the principles upon which CBGM is based is that scribes did their best to reproduce their manuscripts without editing. That's what it's based on. And since it can work and establish familial patterns, then that seems to be part of the outcome of all this. But the scribe of P45 has a lot of singular readings. If you've read Royce's work on it, it's that big of a book. There are places where the scribe of P45 engaged not in editing in the sense of changing words, but dropping what he considered to be excessive words, repetitive words. Well, does that make P45 irrelevant in a CBGM world? And I started thinking, Dr. Gurry actually suggests dropping singular readings from CBGM analysis. If we dropped singular readings from P45, would CBGM allow us to identify the textual orientation and connection of P45 and extend, by that means, those lines back into the 2nd century and hence do exactly what I want to do, and that is cast light into that quote-unquote dark period? Those will help with that. It's going to take a lot of time. And to be honest with you, we're looking at debates next year. And I don't know how I'm going to do that and that, because I don't got anybody to help me with this. I don't have research assistants, nothing. This is all me, myself, and I. And as Rich will tell you, pretty much most of my DL preparation is me, myself, and I on a bike with an iPod. But you can't do this on a bike with an iPod. I can do a lot of my debate preparation, but we've already got Adnan Rashid before G3. I can tell you now that the INC folks have agreed to a debate on whether the INC is the one true church, probably in San Diego. I am well aware of the fact that Jimmy Akin has says he'd be willing to debate in San Diego as well. Michael Brown and I are working right now to arrange a debate, the two of us together against 2 Black Hebrew Israelites. And in the midst of all that, Yasser Qadi and I are definitely doing round number 2. And we might have a really interesting place to do it now, too, that will just drive certain people right over the cliff. But more on that later. Put that together with the Swiss Reformation and the global trip around the world, and I don't know when you sleep, to be honest with you. But I love that stuff. I love all of that, and it's hard to say no to any of it. But obviously, your prayers and support are very much needed to be able to continue to do that kind of stuff. But that's what we're looking at. So, in answer to Matthew's question on Twitter, which forced me to do stuff I wasn't going to do, thank you very much. Will CBGM allow us to determine the original autographs of the Bible? Well, no, because we don't have them. The entire principle of textual criticism is reconstructing that text to the best of our abilities in light of what we have. And so if CBGM becomes, and is functioning already, but becomes generally accepted as a very important tool in the textual critics' bag, so to speak, then yes, it will assist us in increasing our confidence in the establishment of what's called that Ausgangstext, that original text. There's a lot of discussion, by the way, Eldon Epp and other people as to exactly what that means. I won't get into that right now. Or will there still be work, new theories, methods, etc., that need to be done? There will always need to be textual critical studies being done. I know that Bart Ehrman says we're just tinkering with the original right now. But for us, it's extremely important. There will always be new discoveries. I would imagine fewer as time goes on, the farther we get from that time period, of course. But there will always be a need for textual critical studies. Will textual critics be able to do this without more earlier manuscripts? There is more to be learned from the extant manuscripts. It's one thing the CBGM, I will say, the one thing that CBGM does seem to do is to increase the value of older manuscripts that were just sort of all lumped together in the past. And in fact, in NA28, there are a couple minuscule manuscripts now that are being cited regularly that were just lumped into all minuscules in NA27. Because the computers have said, hey, you know, this manuscript here, every time we make a decision as to what the original text is, it seems to be tracking right along there. So this seems to be a pretty important witness. And so along those lines, yeah, it has increased our knowledge of what we already had. You get more the more manuscripts you get. And look, the CBGM databases will continue to get larger and larger as we get more and more collation in. And for a lot of folks, they don't like any of this. I mean, I can't imagine that Doug Wilson would like this in light of our debate book. I want something firm right here, right now. I don't want any of this stuff. I just can't imagine. I know that someone like Erasmus could not even begin to conceive of what CBGM is about and things like that. There just weren't enough manuscripts available to him to even contemplate such things, let alone the computer technology. But I just have to think that if those early great scholars had, you know, if we could somehow bring them up to speed in the modern period, we'd just be ecstatic, absolutely ecstatic, that we are bringing every bit of our ability to think to bear on this issue. I really think they would be really excited. So there you go. Man, that just totally blew the entire program all over the place. So there you go. But yeah, much more on that in the future, I would assume. What I eventually want to do is, for example, Gurry and Wasserman give an example of how CBGM can shed light on the textual variant at Mark 1:1, whether the Son of God is in Mark 1:1. And you go back to 2006, my debate with Shabir Ali at Biola University. Shabir brought that textual variant up. Well, it's fascinating when you apply CBGM to Mark 1:1, and you have to use that volume right there to do it, because the mark isn't out yet in the ECM. When you apply CBGM methodology, what's interesting is the manuscripts that contain the longer reading, Son of God, have a higher genealogical coherence than the ones that do not, which suggests, does not prove, but suggests that the deletion happened more often by accident in the past than any kind of addition did. So is that significant? Yeah, it's a whole new element of data that we've not had before. And is it going to be apologetically relevant? It will be, but could it be abused and misused? Yeah. So I would highly recommend to you young guys coming up. Someone in the channel asked a very good question. Is it limited to Greek manuscripts? Totally. One of the limitations is it does not take into any consideration Latin, Sahidic, Bohairic, anything like that. Nothing about early church fathers, citations, all that has to be done the old-fashioned way. It has to be collated as a one witness over against these things. This is solely focused upon the Greek manuscripts themselves and does not take into consideration any versional information. Will someone come up with a way of adding that in or factoring that in the future? I'd assume so. I'm not sure how it would work. The same principles could work if you had the Latin database to work with, or if you had a Bohairic, Sahidic, Coptic, Syriac, whatever. I would assume with all of those languages, you could eventually create a CBGM style database.
Shares of General Motors rose to $42.02 today. That's an uptick of 25 cents.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. So CBGM became GM. So I just got a report on GM stock prices because I forgot to turn my iPhone upside down. I think that's funny. Anyway, so yes, it is only Greek New Testament manuscripts there. Yeah, someone else well, that's the same guy. So one guy asked in Twitter and then asked the same thing in channel, and I saw it in channel and then it came up in the other. And then someone asks me, I guess I'm not watching the Marcus Rogers, Stephen Bankhart's debate. Nope, I'm not, am I? Nor do I have a whole lot of interest in doing so. So anyway, there we go. That's great. Lots of stuff we covered there. And I will blame certain people for that. But let's I'm going to have to change this. There we go. Should have a video coming to you now. That was pretty deep stuff. So we'll take a drink of water and let Siri have interrupted things and move us on from there. This is directly relevant, and it's going to be continuing the same topic, but not quite on the same depth, thankfully. I wanted to address presentation that was posted about, 2 weeks ago, called The Corruption of the Old and New Testaments Explained Simply in 15 Minutes with Examples by Ijaz Ahmed. And obviously now, having taken a left turn, we won't get very far in this, but there are so many basic fundamental issues to deal with here that it could be very, very educational, again, in helping us to understand the transmission of the text, the relationship of the Old and New Testaments, the Greek Septuagint, all the things that go with that. And again, lots of stuff here that you're supposed to get in seminary, but a lot of people don't, and that means that even if you go to your pastor and ask a lot of this stuff, there's just such an emphasis in most seminaries today on promotional concepts, which is normally called evangelism, leadership classes, stuff like that, that the old core of material in regards to biblical history and where the Bible came from, if you can take a Greek class and get your Greek credit in 13 days, you sort of get the idea of what's going on today. And so we do want to address these things and hopefully can assist folks. I have had folks tell me in the past that they did get more information from watching the Dividing Line than they got in Bible college or seminary on certain aspects of these things. And so some of the rest of you are just bored out of your minds, but there'll be another program, and I'm sure there'll be something Calvinistically inclined to talk about somewhere down the road, I suppose.